I'd even throw in a little bit of raw sienna or ultramarine blue to keep it a warm silvery color. If I want to warm it up, I'll go to a little bit to the siennas or the ochre. I'm obviously generalizing some of these colors a little bit. All I want to do is maintain the little swirls that I see in the beaten copper. I don't have to keep it this deep in value. I'm going to have to soften some of those edges. And some people will go crazy just trying to figure out exactly where they were on a very complicated surface. So you have to maintain concentration. Or generalize. If you ever get into trouble, that's the best thing to do is just squint and go from the general to specific, almost like a block in. You go back to, or you try to simplify in order to reestablish yourself. I'm obviously not copying every facet of what I see, though some people might think I'm doing it obviously more than they might, but you always have to abbreviate at some point or another. But you want to certainly maintain effect. So if anything, squint your eyes just a little bit. Try and keep perspective where it is you're working, and generalize a little bit. Now we have this frosty look that comes around the corner back here. We've got to make it low value and a very neutral, kind of a gray brown color, because it's not quite as cool as the stuff we've been painting out here in the light. It has to be subtle and dark enough to turn the corner, of course. What I was doing there is stopping for a second to see if I had my little finger in a place that might mess up some paint. I notice, of course, when I first start painting that I will get little rabbit tracks or little finger tracks on my painting. Of course, have to repair all that. But that's the way I have certainly chosen to support my finger and stabilize my hand while I'm putting down paint. It just seems to me that a mahl stick is an extra thing to put in your hand, and my left hand is occupied holding all these brushes. The texture of bread, what a fascinating challenge it is to try and get that texture, something I don't paint very often. I've painted a few times, but You have to paint all these little knobs as if make them look a little bit dimensional, and yet not too stark, not too much as if they're spots on the bread. They have to be slightly, they have to contribute to the form. Everything has to contribute to the form. Interesting thing about painting is that you really make your own challenges. Painting, sculpting, all of that stuff. And it makes life a little bit more interesting to deal with those creative aspects of life. And you always have projects that you can finish with and be done with and move away from and leave to as your legacy, so to speak, you know. In an otherwise unchanging world, we have to, you know, deal with the aspects of just making a living and providing for ourselves every day. So art gives us a diversion from that. And I'm surprised, really, by the number of students who really want to watch my processes as I paint, every stroke, just to see exactly how I do things. And I don't, to me, that would be tremendously boring to watch every stroke. But the forms as they come together, as a piece emerges, is really quite fascinating. I think it's a fascinating experience for people to watch something actually emerge that looks beautiful and fascinates them somehow about the arts that propels us or causes us to do it. Not everybody would give it the energy and the effort. As I watch my students, there are just some students who just don't have the ambition. They just don't care enough to want to make something beautiful. I keep telling them that all I want is perfection, but you know, it's just something about art. You've got to do it at the highest level of your ability, otherwise it's not going to be any good to you. You will always not appreciate something that is mediocre. It's the same with neither you or any other person who's going to buy your artwork will want something that's less than your best effort. Mediocrity does not sell, not even in garage sales. And then came Gustave Courbet, who brought us all back down to earth and said, you can't paint a past or future century with accuracy. You've got to paint what's right in front of you. Okay, what I'm trying to see whether or not I've created enough texture on that to really move on now to something else. I think I'm done with the bread. Just a couple more touches to make this stuff look like it belongs, soften an edge or two so that the forms seem to fit. All right, the bread is finished. I'm going to focus now, I think, on this this squash that's in front, this orange squash. I'm not even sure exactly what kind of squash that is, but it's beautiful. So I've gotten, I've actually taken some time, and you didn't see me do this on video, but I darkened some areas so that we've got the basis for the form. Now I'm just going to go in and model form as I see it. I want a very bright orange. That orange that I just, that I have is not as bright as I'd like. It seems a little bit neutralized. And I'm going to get a newer sable brush, number 4. This is a Utrecht Rhenish Kolinsky number 4. Just because it gives us a little bit thinner edge on the brush. I'm going to bring up a couple of values now, right there in the middle. To begin giving it a little bit more form. A little more highlight in the middle. And you'll notice that there is a highlight in the valley of those between those humps on the squash itself. So it actually goes lighter down here between those lumps on the squash. You know, I think I would actually like to see another painter of a great skill or talent actually paint, but I can't imagine it being that fascinating to watch me paint. It's a lot. You know, it seems to me like it would be as fascinating as watching paint dry. It seems to me that it would be boring, but others apparently are fascinated to some degree to watch this process. Throwing in just a little bit of ultramarine blue to neutralize as it approaches the shadow. But I would love to watch Nelson Shanks paint, or some other very fine artist. All right, we've set the stage for the little detail. Now we'll just make sure that we've got everything modeled as well as we want it. I'm going to throw a little alizarin crimson in. From my limited number of colors. alizarin crimson and a little orange, maybe a little cad red light for this shadow. So now we're taking it section by section to make sure that we've got everything modeled to the limit here. Some little striations of light. Little streaks of light might be a better term. Neutralizing a little bit towards the back end of this lump that I'm painting. You know, it's fascinating to me, it always has been, the differences in the way people see, because, you know, we talk about values and hues and brilliance and chroma and all those kind of, that terminology, and we try to describe it to students so that they can understand what it is they're looking at and seeing actually. But what is it that actually turns on the capability to see it in terms of paint, see it in, you know, to translate it into form? And I know that my vision is just as good or as theirs, or theirs is as good as mine. Yet there are particulars that they don't see that I see when I'm looking at a subject. And I think lots of it has to do with what's in your mind's eye after a long career of looking at things to try and develop form and so forth. Because I know what contributes to the form, I'm able to paint that, knowing what will happen. Looking for the small contrasts and the exact values and so forth. You wonder exactly why it is that some people don't see the same way that an artist, a realist, sees. I suppose most of it is in the training and in the experience and how willing they are to really give it a hard look. But Betty Edwards, who wrote a couple of books on drawing the right side of the brain, how she was able to get her students to look and to see things for the first time and then draw exactly what they were seeing in front of them. Of course, what she does in her book is to show how people go from this symbolic method of drawing and painting to a far more objective one, that is visually measuring with their eyes the value, the exact chroma, and all that it really exists, and making their mind see things more like a camera does in reality. Like a digital camera, you know, that translates the exact color and value and edge treatment, the softness and the hardness of everything that's up there. Exactly like it is. What she would do with her students is actually to take them out of that mode of drawing things symbolically by confusing their minds. What she would do is to turn the drawings upside down, or to have them draw something upside down rather than right side up, so that they had to look at it as a real line and as an angle, and all of the smaller parts sort of trick the students into seeing things they never saw before, rather than drawing the almond eyes and so forth. When they didn't recognize something, then they could take it out of that symbolic mode that they had always, you know, translated things into. It's like every child has drawn a house with the little X across the windows and the little curling smoke that comes from the statues and the chimneys, and the birds that look like little M's in the sky. All of that we've all done, because that's the simple symbolism that we used to use as children. We would all symbolize rather than really look and measure very carefully. So it takes a lot of energy. The other part that's difficult about seeing is that there's so much information that you see in front of you that you have to simplify or abbreviate some of it, or abstract, if you will. That's a brief or summary. The word means brief or summarized version. So we never really translate anything literally, because there are far too many spots on that bread for me to catch everything. So we eliminate some things, but doing it with the thought that we're going for the things that will create the most important visual effect, going for the forms, how to make it look dimensional on a two-dimensional surface, three-dimensional on a two-dimensional surface. So we have to think in terms of what is it that causes us to see that form the way that we perceive it in reality. And so we have to think about form. Think about form every time we paint an object. And I know I've got a student who is actually painting this with me, who's painting, for instance, that picture, and she gets the big highlights, but that form, as it turns on the lip of the jug, is simply left out because it's just a piece of perhaps too much detail for her to deal with. And it ends up contributed really a lot to the form. And so she loses out a little bit of that chance to get the form working. Okay, the base color on that stem, of course, is a very dark green. And I'm gonna, before I even put that stem on there, I'm gonna put the shadow underneath it. And of course, that'll give it a good deal of form. I'm going to use a little burnt umber, a little bit of alizarin crimson, a little bit of sienna, and see how that will work. The cast shadow. Okay. Let's see, I need to pull in the line of that light orange underneath the stem to define that bottom edge a little bit. Let's see, what color? I think I've used phthalo green actually for that stem. That's you could use a very dark sap green would be great, but this is a very dark green, and that will just get us the darker values that we want. I could make it a little earthier by throwing in a little bit of red, maybe even a touch of alizarin crimson, because that will make it go very, very dark, and that'll provide us a base. We can come out now with, we'll build a little form. Using a smaller brush, number 2. I think this is a synthetic mongoose. Still in good shape. Now, some synthetic brushes, in case I haven't talked about this, synthetic brushes sometimes wear, especially the nylon and those kind of things. I don't use them because they wear in a way that makes them bush. Makes the individual hairs of the brush kind of curl outward, and so you're painting with a bush and not too long, and that is not a desirable situation, so we want to avoid that. Now, obviously, a brush is just an instrument to spread paint, so whatever does the job is good. I'm sure that there are other artists like even Nelson Shanks who might be shocked if I were to say that, because they really specialize in their brushes and use expensive brushes. And brushes really are important. If you don't have good brushes, then you're hampering yourself. I don't want to say that they're not important, because they are. And I know that there are artists who paint very quickly, and that's not a bad thing. As a matter of fact, it's very financially advantageous, to have to be able to do quick paintings. And some artists, of course, do fairly good paintings and don't do a lot of detail. But people like Schmid and Dan Gerhardt and others who can paint rapidly use a very bravura type brushstroke or they just put a lot of paint on the canvas and can mix it together in such a way that it looks beautiful. Kind of like Joaquin Sorolla, who was a Spanish painter. That's really good. If you want a lot of detail, then you watch Marlon Adams paint. But I really am certainly put off by those who paint quickly just for the sake of monetary gain, because it's just not art unless it's done to the, it's not good art unless it's really done with as good a quality as you can bring to the painting. Since the last time that we got together here, I've finished this corn. Of course, this stuff, and obviously the corn shucks is more detailed, so it takes a lot of more looking at the lights and darks and how they're defined and so forth. The volumes here are interesting in that you have to get in the darker oranges, and they have to be dark in order to make a volume. Even these little kernels of corn, obviously, have to have the dark first, and then you put on a highlight, maybe even diffuse that a little bit, and come up to a really high highlight. So it's just a process of building the form again, and I know that I've emphasized that over and over again. But in order to get that form, you've got to start with the darks. And usually in oil painting, you do build up from a darker background to a lighter one. And that's what gives you a good deal of value transitions. And now you see I'm painting these corn shucks, and what I'm doing basically is looking at the small value transitions, and I'm using a number 2 Kolinsky Red Sable round brush because it'll give me some smaller lines, these striations in the corn shucks, those little lines in the corn shucks and so forth. I can paint with a smaller point. Which I can get with a small round. But this one's not too small. I can paint larger areas with it also. So what I'm doing is just kind of following a pattern here and trying to get it approximately right. But if it, obviously I don't have to get it exact. I can actually repeat. If I were to start on this side and move in to meet this side, I might get a point where things don't quite match up, so I might just look at what I can do to repeat a section or something to make it look like it matches up the way it should. And I'm finding some of that right here, but I'm just going to keep building one direction and building from another and making them meet up, because there's a lot of detail in here, and obviously dealing with all this much detail might be overwhelming to a lot of people. So you just, if you do a block in first, obviously you get things approximately where they should be. And then you try to match things up, and with a lot of stuff you can sort of fake it and bring things together. Still life painting is a marvelous teaching tool. It's the most controllable It doesn't move on you too badly except when things grow, or maybe even you'll have a little bit of movement even in dry corn shucks. But in essence, it's the most controllable. You can set it up the way you want it and paint it that way. People are not that way. Landscapes are not that cooperative. You've got 2-hour period of time, and you're not guaranteed the same conditions, you know, the next day. So this is a great learning tool. So I hope you've enjoyed the video, or that you will enjoy the video. And so. Go ahead and paint.